Hi, my name is Arthur, and in the last video we looked at some problems with our tile map idea, my tile map idea for walls, which didn't work out quite the way I was hoping. This is the solution that I've come up with for it, and well, some of the tiles in the one map can use being erased because they're useless now. And the graphics are still useful and I can still use those, but the actual tiles themselves I'll never use. Um, what I'm going with moving forward is the one tile map that's on top of the character and the other assets represents this back wall, and it's the absolute wall for the level or the world. So I guess for the level. And then the second tile map consists of these walls. And it's also an absolute. Like, the player will never be seen outside of this border. So that's kind of a map border sort of asset now. The solution for the actual walls is to go with individual walls and individual trees, and to simply duplicate these items. So if I want to create another wall, all of these walls were just created by duplicating. And if I implement snap and smart snap, they go together pretty nicely as long as my grid is configured at the same pixels as the artwork was, which is 8 pixels. So these all went together pretty easy. It's a little more work than a tile map, but it works, and that's the main point. So we'll have a look at the character, and you can see he's facing a different direction now. That's because I've actually put in some animations, and we'll get back to the animations because I'm just playing around figuring stuff out in advance. The player is a kinematic character, and a sprite right currently has a 4-direction sprite sheet. Then he has the collision shape on the bottom, and we'll get back to the animation player. The tree, that is just a static body, a sprite, and a collision shape 2D. And as demonstrated in the previous video, this works fine for Y sorting. With the wall, I accessed a tutorial by, I think it was Game Development Center, and he's got a bunch of isometric stuff, and it's really quite good content, and he sorted me out on how to accomplish the wall. And this is what I came up with. The wall, I'm pretty sure this is the exact same size as the graphic that I had in the tile map. So it has the sprite, it has an offset on the sprite that is not quite right yet. I believe the best place for that offset to be would be in the absolute bottom middle, which I think is right around here-ish. I need to get into the image software and just do a calculation for the offset, because that can simply be calculated and implemented into the sprite's offset. Currently I just have it like this, and it's probably not quite right. So I'll have to look at that, and it's probably close, but probably not quite right. And then the polygon, instead of putting the collision shape directly on the bottom of the wall, the way to keep the player out of the wall is to kick the collision shape out. So on this side, it's kicked out by the 8 pixel by 8 pixel grid. And the same thing was done on the back. This is where the polygon would sit if it was just the bottom being marked as the collision. But this is kicked out a little bit, and between that and the player's collision shape, it'll keep them out of the wall. So let's just have a quick look at how that worked out, and then we're going to get into what we need to look at for the animations, and we'll start talking about getting this guy animated. I'll just find my gamepad here. So currently he has 4 directions already, so I've already figured that out, and we'll get to that later. So this is the solution with the wall. He can go around the wall, but the solution does have a drawback. There are places where if he's hugging the wall, he can get hung up on. Well, that actually explains some behavior I've seen in older games as to why that happens. But as you can see, he goes around the wall. There's not a lot of, well, there's no being drawn on the wrong side of the wall. And you can see it's a little excessive, the amount he can actually approach this wall. And that's the consequence of making a wall this long. So I could reduce that effect by decreasing the length of the walls and doing more work building maps. So that's the option for that. And I'll be looking at increasing my graphics for this series. And a lot of that I'm not going to demonstrate, because how to build this wall applies to a shorter wall. And it applies to many different things. We're going to look at other things now and other types of graphics. And the tree, it's the same thing. I put the collision shape so he can't walk into the tree and stuff. And that graphic is very reasonable. So that sorts out the Y sort issue pretty good. And the next thing that we're going to look at is, well, we probably have enough time to talk about the camera, because the camera also proves to be an issue, and it's one that kind of needs to be talked about to avoid that problem. So what I tried actually adding a camera to the player. So let's see, where's that camera at? So let's do that. Let's make it current and let's see what happens. And then we'll talk about the solution I'll be looking at for that. Now, if you watch the different elements in the scene, what you're going to see is they're shifting around. And what's happening is, as they're being sorted, it's causing them to jitter. So they have a jitter and they're shifting position slightly. So that's the consequence of trying to make the camera firmly anchored to the player, and I'm thinking that's something that's going to need to be avoided for the sake of keeping things as simple as I can. So rather than attaching a camera to the player, I think the direction I'm going to go with that is when the player can walk around, but when he approaches an edge of the camera frame, I think I'll have a scripted camera in the main scene that would, if he gets this close, say, the camera would recenter onto him as a consequence of approaching the grid that closely. So the camera would move once, then he would be in the center, be free to move until he got to that distance again, and then the camera would recenter. And then have some camera bounds defined, and I do have a script somewhere that will define the camera bounds according to the tile map. So I'll have to see how that works out with an isometric game. So in the next video, we're going to come back and we're going to look at Blender and what was done to make the 4 images to get him to change directions, and how to do the 8 images so that he has all 8 directions. And then we'll get into the walk cycle animation aspect of that. So that's in the next video, and until then, take care.